All right, for those that can't hear me, we have hearing-assisted devices. Mac says it every Sunday morning, but if you can't hear Mac, then it kind of defeats the purpose, so I'm going to say it again. And if you can't read this, buy some glasses. Good. Can you read that? Can you read that, everybody? Is that good? Lisa, can you read it? Can you read this? That's better. That's as big as we can get, folks. A lot better? Oh, well, like I said.
Just saying. Oh, he wants to say it, but he's not going to.
Okay. Keep all my little snarky comments to myself, right, Betty? Close enough? Okay. All right, so if you remember last week, we had a really encouraging message from Zephaniah chapter 10, and then we got super bummed out in chapter 11, as prophets always do for us. Yeah, whatever. Zechariah. They're related. It's okay. It's the same book. I mean, one's 15 chapters or whatever, and one's like 4, but that's fine. Yeah. All right, Zechariah. Good old Zach. Here he is, helping us out. So I've been doing some prep, obviously, for the Heaven class we're going to be going into in a couple of weeks. And yeah, we're doing topics. Everybody wants to hear about heaven. I don't know why. I don't know. You know. I mean, yeah, I guess. So my personal opinion on heaven is it's one of those areas where if we look at people's opinions about what the scriptures talk about in heaven, and if they're all completely wrong, it's still heaven. God's still there. So I could not care less about the idea of the details. But there's some interesting stuff out there right now, especially right now in the Brotherhood, which is one of those key words in the Church of Christ, in the Brotherhood. A lot of stuff is going around right now about folks drawing lines of division and fellowship around people's position on heaven. To me, it's again one of those areas where if we've got it all wrong, we know God's there. He's going to sort it out. He's still in control. So if someone's opinion about what heaven's going to be like is wrong, what does it matter? Why draw fellowship lines on heaven of all things, like the goal for all of us anyway? Yeah, it is sinful. So that's the problem. But we like our bubbles, we like our safe little spaces, and as long as we're in that little safe space, that little bubble, we're okay. And anything that kind of pressures that can be scary, I guess, for some folks. But I don't know. We'll get into it. We'll talk about some stuff that's not controversial. And then towards the end, of course, I kind of have to throw a little controversy in there and see what y'all think. If you don't like it, it's still heaven, so who cares? If you do like it, great. Maybe it'll be like that. So, good times. We're not in heaven yet. We're talking about salvation here in chapter 12. This is what Zechariah has to say about that. The oracle of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, before we get there, remember in chapter 11 at the very end, there was this big kind of picture made about 2 staffs that were used by the prophet, and they were to be broken. The whole point of that, if you want to summarize that picture, that illustration really, is the idea that the concept of the northern tribes of Israel and the southern tribes of Judah is no longer a thing. They're going to be a unified nation once again. So that which was broken apart by the division that was caused after David and Solomon, that's now kind of been healed. So they should no longer consider themselves in the north or in the south. They're now just Israelites. And of course, the importance of that is the idea of unity. I mean, if you talk about unity in the Bible, you can go all over the place and talk about unity of communion between Adam and Eve and God walking in the cool of the day in the garden. That was the original unity between the Creator and the created. You could go to Abraham being unified with his family, the father of many of a great nation, but he's not got a family yet. And so that unity between the fellowship of Abraham and his offspring and God himself. There's the unity of all the people from Israel or Jacob that came out of Egypt. They were all unified going through the Red Sea onto the way to the promised land, which is a type of heaven, or even the church if you want to get kind of critical about it. And then there's the unity of the kingdom. So you have the north and the south, and that's not unified, but now it's unified again. And then you go to the New Testament. I mean, all you got to do is go to 1 Corinthians. And their major issue in Corinth as Christians they were not unified. They were all Christians, quote unquote, but they were saying, I'm a disciple of Apollos, I'm a disciple of Paul, disciple of Barnabas, disciple of Jesus. Well, great. They're all disciples, but you're not unified in your following of the Lord. So unity is important, obviously, especially after we had our conversation about how folks like to make those dividing lines of fellowship in their safe little bubbles. That's not unification. That's the idea of a Pharisaical mindset in which we are the elect ones, and if you're not a part of us, you're not going to heaven. Christ had a problem with that. So, having said all that, that was chapter 11 in a nutshell. They're now unified as one great nation again. And all of this, by the way, is prep for 400 years in the future when you got this guy Jesus who's born to a poor family of outcasts, and then they are rearing up the Son of God himself. So that's all prep for that event, of course, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay. Thus declares the Lord, who stretched out the heavens and founded the earth and formed the spirit of man within him. Okay, so if you're looking for descriptions of our Creator God, here is one way to describe him. He stretched out the heavens. So this imagery, of course, is kind of poetic, kind of symbolic. He didn't literally just have stars in his hands and stretch them out, but it's a word picture for us that he's the one that designed their allotments. Real quick to kind of prepare us for a couple of weeks from now, when you see the word heavens here, what does that insinuate to you? Clouds, okay. Galaxies, stars, etc. Everything above the earth is like the critical answer, right? Because it shows us, when you talk about that word heaven, in the Hebrew especially, it just meant that which is up. So it's not the ground, it's that which is up there. And of course, up there could be clouds, could be birds, could be stars, whatever they are, we know, but they didn't have a concept of the light taking that time to reach us. And then, of course, it's blue up there, so that's got to be water up there, obviously, because what else could be blue besides water? So that's water up there, apparently, because that's where water comes from when it rains, right? That's the logic of an ancient Near East person. And then, of course, when you go upwards, that's talking about things that are literally up there, but also in the sense of an authority or power, because they're up there too, and all the kings would build their house on a hill. So the power and the authority of someone is proportional to how high up they are. Well, God's got to be up there because he's the best, so he's up there too in that heaven thing. So just keep that in mind, that the idea of heaven to us is a very loaded word in the English because we have more specific language. In the Hebrew and Greek, you've just got one word. So you got to figure out from context what we're talking about. All right, so he stretched out the heavens, he founded the earth, and then here's one that's significant to us, and formed the spirit of man within him. So where is your spirit? Inside, right? So how to get there? That's the right answer. God put it there. Where is it located? Specifically. There's no answer. So that's kind of a trick question. Sorry. Had to do it to you. But yeah, it's in there, where it's in there. That's as close as we can get. It's in there. If you want to look at a verse that kind of shows that in a little bit of detail, but not exact detail, the Lord God formed man from the dust or the dirt of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. That word breath can also mean spirit, right? Or breath or poured out. The breath of man, and man became a living being, in some translations. King James says a living soul. So if you're looking for the combination of what makes us us, is we got a physical body made of the elements of the earth, which is why we go back into the earth when we pass away from this life. And then God breathed into our nostrils that breath of life, that spirit of life. He gave us that spark, if you will, to get us started. And then we became who we are on the inside. So that's the beginning of that. Here's the message from that Creator God. Behold, I'm about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding peoples. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. So we have Jerusalem inside of Judah, inside of Israel, right? It's got layers to this imagery here. On that day, which we know that day is not literally a 24-hour day, it's a time period. On that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it. So let me ask you this. Do we historically find a moment in which we find Jerusalem, Judah, and Israel being a formidable empire from this point forward? No. Israel's not going to be an empire. They're not even going to be a really strong nation. They're going to be occupied by the Grecians first through this guy named Alexander, who had some pretty big accomplishments. And then later on, they're going to be controlled by certain generals, essentially, of Alexander's empire. And then you have these Herodians coming along, and they're going to rule it for a while. And then you've got the Rome come along, and they'll say, well, we'll keep the Herodians in place as long as they know who's really in charge, the Romans. And so when you look at this, and all the nations of the earth will gather against Israel, what are you thinking this might mean? If it's not going to be a literal, physical, formidable military empire again, how are all nations going to be subjected by Israel?
Well, Jesus is born in Israel, and everyone becomes subject to him.
Okay, that's it, right? So you have Jesus coming along, who's going to be a king, but not the king that they expect or want. He's going to be a priest, but not the one that they really recognize as being from Aaron. And he's going to be the lamb who's going to give his life. And so that sacrifice is going to allow all nations to go to Israel to learn about God. So if you're looking big picture, Acts 2, right? You have all nations going to Jerusalem for Pentecost. They're there to celebrate as Jews or proselytes, or even strangers in the gate, like Cornelius in Acts 10. And then you've got all of them realizing who's really in control, who's the real king, who's the real leader of this great kingdom that's not physical but spiritual in nature, and that's talking about the church, right? So this is a preview of that. Now, if you were living in Zechariah's day, you're like, great, we're going to be strong again, and people are going to fear us, and they're not going to be able to conquer us again. And that led to the Maccabean revolt, because they were waiting for that. And they're like, well, so these Grecians are here, and we're not in control of ourselves anymore, so let's kind of help God out by killing some people and objecting and being like Daniel and not giving in to their demands. And that kind of works for like 50 years, and then it doesn't work anymore. So God's promises aren't really sure. So anyway, saying all that, we have this prophecy. They were looking for it to be fulfilled in a literal, physical, military sense. We know, with the benefit of hindsight, that it didn't really take place in a literal, physical way. It took place in a spiritual way through Christ and the church. So again, that would have been very fuzzy to them, but it's clear for us because we have the book of Acts, for example. Okay, on that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness. But for the sake of the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open when I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. So the meaning there is, it's pretty fuzzy, right? But the idea essentially is these great military leaders that are going to come against Jerusalem and Judah, God is still in control. The riders may not be able to fight, but God has his eyes open, and he's going to allow them to be victorious. Meaning, essentially, that Israel's not going to fade away like it did before, because God's got a plan to bring about the Messiah through this nation. Then the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts, their God. On that day I will make the clans of Judah like a blazing pot in the midst of wood, like a flaming torch among sheaves. And they shall devour to the right, to the left, all the surrounding peoples, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem. So here's the big question. Is Jerusalem going to be able to stand throughout invading armies? Yes. Well, they do. They're taken, but is Jerusalem ever destroyed again like it was for the captivity? No. So all the work they did to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, all the work they did to rebuild the house, though it's not that impressive anymore, is that going to be destroyed the same way that it was until that great day of the Lord? Is the temple there when Jesus was there? Yeah, it was. So what God is saying here is that all the work that you've invested into this land is not going to be destroyed like it was from the empires until this great day happens when you have a king. So when Jesus comes along, is there a temple? Yes. Was it semi-impressive? Semi-impressive because Peter's like, hey, look, this is a great temple. He's like, yeah, you think it's so great? Well, Herod did a great job restoring it, but there's going to be a day coming, AD 70, when there's not going to be one stone stacked on top of another. So yeah, it's impressive, but you're missing the point of the temple in the first place. We're talking about a place where God meets his people in communion. A little picture of heaven is what you find in the temple. Let's pause. Do you remember the imagery that was designed inside the temple itself, in the holy place? Kinda? Well, the altar's outside, but on the inside, there was a description in the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy of what's supposed to be made inside the holy place. Not the Holy of Holies, but the holy place where people commune with God. The ark is in the most holy place. Okay. Right. What's the imagery on the curtains, for example? Embroidered with gold. Okay. Okay, cherubims are on top of the Ark of the Covenant. Well, let me just give you the answer. You ready for the answer? Everybody ready for the answer? Okay. Pomegranates. You got trees. You got flowers. You got all these different fruit around there. What does that remind you of? A garden. So when God communes with his people, he wants the imagery of a garden. What does that remind you of? The Garden of Eden. The perfect dwelling place of mankind in full fellowship with their Creator God. Where are they? In a land that's beautiful, that has the trees of the earth. There's not a thorn to be seen. There's food there to eat. There's fresh, clean, pure, living water there. Living, by the way, means running in that context. So there's little brooks around. Everything's watered beautifully, and then God goes down there in the cool of the day to walk around his beautiful creation. And guess who also is there? Man, Adam, who's made in his image. That's the meeting place between God and his people. We see it in Genesis, in the garden before the fall. We see it in the tabernacle, which is the movable tent that they would have made to make communion with God. When they walk into the holy place, they're leaving that dusty, dirty world behind. They're going to a pure place where God is in its beautiful creation in a garden. Go to the temple, you walk outside of the outer gates, you go inside the holy place. What's there? A garden, and God's waiting to take you home. And then, of course, this is leading into a couple of weeks from now, when we talk about heaven, what's it going to be like? We're leaving that world behind. It's all destroyed, all behind us. And we walk into this place, the New Jerusalem. And God is there, and it's a garden again. A beautiful place for us to live and exist in communion with our God forever. So that's what we're pointing at here in Zechariah, is this thing that you've built to have communion with God is going to be protected by Him as long as you trust in Him, and there's going to be this King coming. And when you get to know this King, you're going to have that true communion with God once again. That's why the prophets are so important. Is it a little bit unclear to us? Sure. Is the language here not like how we speak? Sure. But the overall imagery here is like, you guys are going to set the world on fire, because this message cannot be contained within these four walls of this temple. It's going to go out to the utter ends of the world. And here we are in America, of all places, in 2023, still reading about this great message. It's a pretty good plan, if you ask me. It's almost like God knows what He's doing. Weird, right? Okay, questions, comments? We'll get into more of that heaven talk later, obviously.
When it talks about Aaron's rod, why is it called Aaron's rod instead of Moses' rod?
Well, it was literally Aaron's rod that budded. So inside the ark, you got three things. They lost two of those things. I don't know how, but they did. Aaron's rod that budded was inside the ark, right? You got a pot of manna to kind of remind them where they came from and who provided for them. And then you've got the tablets of the covenant. So we have Charlton Heston putting the Ten Commandments on stone inside there, right? That's what the Bible talks about, Charlton Heston's being there doing it. So Aaron's rod that budded was a symbol of God choosing him to be the first high priest and to pass it through his bloodline was the idea. So it was his walking stick, his staff, that was a dead, dried up piece of wood. We would put lacquer on it to protect it from the water elements, right? But it was dead, and then God made it alive. I mean, talk about God being on the nose. He takes a dead thing and makes it alive, and then Romans talks about, well, yeah, He takes all of us who are dead in sins, and thanks be to God, through His grace, we have life again too. So God just kind of has those images all the way throughout. Okay, and the Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not surpass that of Judah. So if you're thinking about what this means in a symbolic way or a spiritual way, if you go and look at what Jesus said at the end of Luke 24, He says, hey, listen, you're going to get the Holy Spirit with power, right? You're going to receive the baptism of fire, whatever that is, Acts 2. And then you're going to hang out in Jerusalem and preach the gospel there first. Preach the good news there first. And then from Jerusalem, where next does it go? Yeah, Judea first. So Jerusalem, then Judea, which is the land of Judah. Right, Judah. And then you've got Samaria. So these half-breed Jews are there, and they kind of know who God is a little bit. And so they hear it, and then where does it go? Everywhere else. Everywhere else. And that's Paul's job, by the way. Take it everywhere else. He's like, all right, guess I'll go to Rome. That's where all roads go to, so we'll start there. All right, it's a pretty good plan. Didn't get there how he wanted, ideally, but he got there, and we have our New Testament because of it. So this is that, right? He's saying we'll start in Jerusalem, we'll go to Judah or Judea, and then we'll go to Samaria, and then we'll go everywhere else, all the nations. We're going to hear about this great message. On that day, again, there's that day, the Lord will protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem so that the feeblest among them on that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, like the angel of the Lord, the messenger of the Lord, going before them. And on that day I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So if they get persecuted, which they did, right? Acts 8:4, then they're not going to be destroyed like they were before. Okay, questions, comments? So again, we had the benefit of hindsight looking back at history and saying, oh, he must be talking about this Jesus guy who came to Jerusalem and then was offered, and that message of the good news of his resurrection went everywhere. They didn't know that. They were like, okay, we've got a king. We're not going to be snuffed out again. We're going to be okay. And then, in case that was unclear, verse 10, I will pour out on the house of David, on the inhabitants of Jerusalem, a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. Well, I mean, as Christians, this seems a little clear, right? Hopefully. When they look at Jerusalem, where Christ was crucified, they're going to see God, whom they have pierced, God, Son of God on the cross. They're going to cry over his death as someone cries over a firstborn son. John 3:16. Only begotten Son of God, right? On that day, the mourning in Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning for Hadad Rimmon in the place of Megiddo. So Megiddo is a place that in the first century would have been kind of like a trash heap, a place where you store all the stuff that you can't really burn quite yet. Well, they tried. Megiddo is also the place where we get the English word Armageddon from. Kind of see how it sounds similar? That's helpful in Revelation when you talk about the great place of Megiddo, or the battle of Megiddo, the place where you would go to burn the trash, the place right next to where our Lord was crucified. The land shall mourn, each family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, and the family of the house of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves. So who's Nathan, by the way? Besides my brother-in-law. Who's Nathan? He's a prophet, right? Remember David. And he kind of got caught up with this whole wife of Bathsheba, or wife of Uriah the Hittite, right? And then this prophet by the name of Nathan came to him and said, I got a story for you. Just tell me the story, right? And that's the whole, thou art the man, right? And then he still loved David so much that after this, when he had a son that was born, he named one of his sons Nathan, which could have been coincidence. There's no verse that says it's because of Nathan the prophet, but I mean, the coincidence there is pretty clear to me. The family of the house of Levi by itself, and their wives by themselves. The family of the Shimeites by themselves, and their wives by themselves. And all the families that are left, each by itself, and their wives by themselves. Chapter 13, verse 1, on that day there shall be a fountain opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness. So you've got this moment in time where you have Jerusalem protected by God himself. You have Judea protected by God himself. You've got all of Israel unified together and protected. And then they apparently kill God, and everyone is deeply distressed because how could they do that to their Creator God, who came in love and mercy, but he died? And then, when everyone is still affected by that decision, there's going to be a fountain of water open to cleanse people from their sins. What's that talking about? Jesus. He's God. He tried to show them that every time someone sins, the price required was blood. It was death. Every time you have an animal sacrificed for a sin, it wasn't to wash that sin away, it was to cover that sin up until the next one. So you have millions of animal sacrifices to prepare people for the imagery of what's the price of sin? Death. So if God wants to get rid of the power of sin, what does God have to do? Die. So we, again, have the benefit of hindsight and to know exactly what this is. You can see for 400 years, the interpreters of this text are like, what in the world are we talking about here? And then Jesus came along and said, those scriptures that you read, they talk about me. Let me show you how.
Why the wives being separated?
Sure. Thanks. Cultural, I guess. The show the power of isolation and grief would be a poetic way to put it. Right? If you can't even cry with your own family, that's how sad you are. Or whatever you think. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. And on that day, seems like the same kind of day, right? Declares the Lord of hosts, I will cut off the names of the idols from the land so that they will be remembered no more, and I will remove from the land the prophets in the spirit of uncleanness. Prophets here, not talking about the good guys, the bad guys, right? Bad prophets. So on that day, seems like the same time period, the idea of idolatry in the land of Israel, Judea, and Jerusalem, to kind of go widest to smallest, idolatry is not going to be the issue anymore, which is good, but also confusing when you got Paul. And first place he goes is the synagogue, where all the Jews are, because he can relate to them easier with scriptures. And then he goes out to talk to people who have no idea what the Jewish scriptures are. So no more idolatry. If anyone again prophesies, his father and mother who bore him will say to him, you shall not live because you speak lies in the name of the Lord. And the father and mother who bore him shall pierce him through when he prophesies. Seems a little harsh, right? Killing your own child because he speaks an untrue prophecy. But if you will recall in Deuteronomy, that was the penalty originally. If you got a guy who's a prophet, he's a false prophet, and what he says does not come to pass, what do you do with the guy? You kill him. Why? He's lying about what God said. And talk about some pressure, right? So anyway, when you preach or teach the Word of God, make sure it's the Word of God. On that day, every prophet will be ashamed of his vision when he prophesies. He will not put on a hairy cloak in order to deceive. Who does that remind you of? Esau and Jacob, right? I mean, good guy Jacob, right? I've preached his life before, and the title of it is The Messy Life, because, I mean, this dude, I guess he turned out okay, but he had some problems, right? I mean, he loved his mom a whole lot. His mom loved him a whole lot, and the mom was not a great influence. She taught him how to lie, cheat, deceive, steal, run away. I mean, he did that pretty well. And then he got deceived with his wife, right? And he had two of them. I mean, you got to marry the sister and the sister, so there you go. And then you go off and you try to reconcile, and then an angel of the Lord tries to wrestle you, and what do? You try to wrestle an angel of the Lord and defeat him. And then he's so strong and so hard-headed and so stubborn that the angel has to resort to popping his hip out of its socket to get him to relent. And he goes, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. I mean, do you want to emulate that guy? I mean, kind of a little bit, just because you can say that, but I mean, seriously. And then you're called a prince of God, so that's pretty good. You change your name to Israel, because God gave you that title, which is pretty cool. And then you get old, and you have a child in your old age, and you baby this child, and you love this child more than all your other sons. And then you're like, you know what's a good idea? Let's make him a special garment, a cloak, that everyone's going to be jealous of and hate this child because of. and his name is Joseph. I mean, talk about a crazy existence. That's our man, Jacob. Anyway, but he will say, I am no prophet. I'm a worker of the soil. I'm just a farmer, man. For a man sold me in my youth. Well, that's a little bit of a, again, cliche. And if one asked him, what are these wounds on your back? He'll say, they're the wounds I received in the house of my friends. Well, I got too drunk one night. My friends beat me up. That's what that is. It's not the fact that I'm just wailing on myself to try to get this unknown false God to answer me. It's not that, of course. I just got beat up. That's all that is. And then verse 7, awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares the Lord of hosts. I mean, come on. This is God saying, all right, there's this shepherd guy right next to me, and he's going to be down here. You're going to strike him. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. I will turn my hand against the little ones. And the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 shall be cut off and perish, and 1/3 shall be left alive. So what's the 1/3 referred to, as other passages reveal to us? The remnant. So you have the shepherd being struck, and then you have the scattering of Israel, and you still got a remnant left. If you're asking me, I think this is talking about the idea of what's going to take place after the time of Jesus in AD 70. You have the people in Jerusalem, people in Israel. They finally have one more revolt in them, and then Rome comes along and says, okay, enough of this. And they go in there, they defile the temple, they sacrifice a pig on the altar of God in Jerusalem. So that place is totally unclean now, obviously. And then you've got people that are knowledgeable about these prophecies. They're like, okay, this is the destruction of the temple again. We're going to get out of here. They all leave, Josephus says, and then that's the end of the temple. It's destroyed. And then, of course, when they're in there, all the scrolls are set on fire, so you can't find the genealogies of who's supposed to be priest anymore. So that's the end of that. And from that point forward, there's no more temple in Jerusalem. That's just my opinion. Verse 9, and I will put this third into the fire and refine them as one refines silver and test them as gold is tested. They will, quote unquote, call upon my name and I will answer them. I will say, these are my people, and they say, the Lord is my God. So from this great time of trial, after the great shepherd at the right hand of God is struck, there's going to be a remnant of the people of Israel who are refined by that trial, and they're restored to a correct relationship with God himself. I mean, this is just Israel hearing the gospel and being saved, if you want to kind of boil it down. Questions about that? So again, you can see how this might be confusing if you're reading this in Zechariah's day, and you're like, so what's going to happen? God's going to come down here, his great shepherd, his great king, his great high priest, and we're going to kill him, and then salvation comes. How's that going to work? Okay. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord, when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women abused. Half of the city shall go out into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. So again, I think this is AD 70. When all the nations come up against Jerusalem, we're talking about Rome here. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when he fights on a day of battle. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide gulf or valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward. So the idea here is, if you're on the Mount of Olives, which is important for us from the book of Matthew, for Jesus, and you see this city being destroyed and being burned, you need to get out of there. Verse 5, you shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azal. You shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. So we'll pause there for the morning. Again, if you're looking for a timestamp on this, this is AD 70. If you go to Matthew 24, Jesus interprets this for us quite clearly, saying, yeah, that's still going to happen. Just watch out for all those events, and you'll know it's time to get out of town. And they did, according to Josephus. Okay, we'll pick up here. We're going to knock out Zechariah and move on to Malachi. Malachi is going to be easy. I've mentioned that 1,000 times before because we know who John the Baptist is. They didn't have that benefit. They're looking for a great prophet. They're looking for their old prophets, not knowing that a new one's going to come along who looks just like him, apparently, or acts just like him. So we'll pause here for the morning. Zechariah, finish up Malachi, and then we'll go on talking about heaven.